How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Beis, Daf 52 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, okay, sheesh. Okay, so today we continue really kind of in the middle of the discussion that we began yesterday about pouring the shirayim of korbanis on the yesod of the Mizbach ha'olah, of the Mizbeach ha'chitzon. Okay, we had seen, there are basically 5 korban chatases that we were discussing: the Par Kohen Mashiach, the Par Davar Shel Tzibur, the Sa'ir Nasi, and the Kispa and the Seira of a Yachid, and we were comparing the psukim written by them when describing how their leftover blood, that means the blood that remains after the Zrikas Hadam, that leftover blood is poured on the yesod, which we'll see. Actually, I have a diagram here. We've seen the yesod before. It was basically the bottom layer of the Mizbeach HaChitzon, and we were learning out things from those psukim, which we will get into in the first section of today's daf, which is pouring leftover blood on the outer altar. Really just kind of a continuation, I'd say. I mean, mamish, really a continuation from yesterday's discussion. And then on Nun Beis, Amud Beis, we have a discussion of applying chatas blood below the hasikra. I don't remember if we've discussed this as well, but of course the korban chatas, the blood is applied to the 4 corners of the mizbeach at the top of the mizbeach. What if the kohen were to apply them below, right in the lower half of the mizbeach? What would the halacha be? We will discuss that, friends. This is what we have planned today for Daf Nun Beis of Masechta Zevachim. Let us begin. All right, friends, we're going to begin on Daf Nun Beis Amid Aleph, on the second line of the Daf. O Eino Ela Lemizbeach Shel Ola Yehei Yesod. Okay. Sheesh. Okay. Wow. What was this going back to? Right. Right. Oh, okay, fine. Great. So this is a reference from the brisa that we discussed yesterday. So what did we discuss yesterday? We discussed sheesh. Do. So basically, as I had mentioned in the introduction, there are 5 psukim that we are considering, that is for our consideration here. Now, the 5 scenarios are, as I mentioned in the introduction, Par Kohen Mashiach, Par Davar Shel Tzibur, Sa'ir Nasi, the Seira of an individual and the Kispa of an individual. Now, by the Par Kohen Mashiach, the Par Davar Shel Tzibur, and the Sa'ir Nasi, it says Al Yisod Mizbach HaOlah, the Olah Mizbeach. Now, by the Kispa and Seira, it only says Al Yisod HaMizbeach. It doesn't specify Mizbach HaOlah. But by the Par Kohen Mashiach, Par Davar Shel Tzibur, and Sa'ir Nasi, it says Mizbach HaOlah. Now, we learned out from the Par Kohen Mashiach that it means the Mizbach HaOlah and not the Mizbeach HaPnimi. By the Par Davar Shel Tzibur, we said it means that there is no yesod on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, if I remember correctly. And by the Sa'ir Nasi, what we learn out from it is that all of the korbanos, it's a little bit hard to kind of like read into the words, but what it means is that all of the korbanos, their shiari adam, their leftover blood, by the korbanos achitzon, that, so like for example, right, that there, for example, shlamim and asham, chatas achitzon, toda, right, their leftover blood is going to be poured on the yesod of the Mizbeach HaChitzon, of the outer Mizbeach. Now, the brisa had suggested, wait, maybe what it means, Al Yisod Mizbeach HaOlah, by the Sa'ir Nasi, it's coming to teach that when it comes to a Korban Olah, when you do the Zrikas Hadam, you davka do it where there is a Yesod. As we have learned in the past, maybe I should have I probably wanted to have I don't remember what. I probably wanted to have a slide about this yesterday. I have a slide today, but it's not about this. Although you could see it actually. You could see it a little bit on this. Yeah, you know what? Let's actually have a look at this slide right now. So what you see in this slide, there's another slide that I have with a bird's eye view, which I don't have here, but that's okay. In this slide, what you see is the Yesod. If you see where the white arrow is, the white arrow, also the blue arrow, but the white arrow is pointing to the Yesod of the Mizbeach, which is basically the bottom layer of the Mizbeach. If you can imagine the Mizbeach of like three sort of squares, each one kind of smaller than the next, that are placed one on top of the other. So like the bottom square is the Yesod, and then there's like a slightly smaller square on top of that, and a slightly smaller square stacked on top of that. But anyways, the Yesod is the bottom layer of the Mizbeach. And what you can see already, and then you could see the Kevesh also, which is the ramp, right? Which is the ramp going up to the Mizbeach. So that Kevesh, the ramp going up to the Mizbeach, was on the southern side of the Mizbeach, which means that to the left of that, where the arrows are pointing to, is the western side of the Mizbeach. So you see that on the entirety of the western side of the Mizbeach, there is the Yesod. But if you look on the southern side of the Mizbeach, the Yesod is actually only going 1 amma into the southern side of the Mizbeach. The point being that the Yesod doesn't entirely surround the Mizbeach. We're actually going to see on Daf Nun Dalet, it's actually a machlokas between Rav and Levi. But anyways, exactly what that means. But anyways, if you look at this image, so you see that the Yesod on the southern side, and the same thing is actually true for the eastern side, there's only Yesod for 1 amma of the southern side and 1 amma of the eastern side, and the southeastern corner doesn't have any Yesod whatsoever. Okay, so basically you have 1 amma of Yesod on the southern side, the Yesod goes to the entirety of the western side, the entirety of the northern side, and only the first amma of the eastern side. Now, when it comes to a Korban Ola, so there's Shtayim Shein Arba, which I believe we're going to learn about tomorrow. Basically what you do is you throw the blood at the corner of the Mizbeach, and by throwing it at the corner, it splatters. It's actually machlokas exactly, also Rav and Shmuel. It's machlokas, but let's assume, we paskin like Shmuel, I think we generally assume like Shmuel, that you take the blood and you throw it against the corner, and then it kind of like goes in both directions. So, for example, if we're talking about the southwestern corner, which is the corner that we're actually looking at in this image, so if you were to take blood and throw it against the wall of the Mizbeach, it would go to the right on the right. It would like kind of like split to the, half of it, let's say, would go to the right and land on the southern side of the Mizbeach, and then the other half would go to the left on the western side of the Mizbeach. So if you do that at the southwestern corner, and you also do that at the northeastern corner, so by throwing the blood against the two corners, you're also getting the blood essentially on a little bit of all 4 sides of the Mizbeach. The southwestern is going to get you on the south and the western. The northeastern is going to get you on the north and the eastern. In the southeastern side, however, there is no Yesod at all, so that's how we know that you aren't going to be doing Zrikas Adam for sure on the southeastern corner. Rather, if we are going to want to do, like I described, Shtayim, throwing the blood against only 2 corners and yet being able to get it on all 4 walls, and also be throwing it on corners of the Mizbeach where there is Yesod, that means you're going to have to be throwing it against the southwestern corner and the northeastern corner. So now, the suggestion in the Gemara is maybe what this pasuk is coming to say, when it says Yesod Mizbach HaOlah, maybe it's not coming to say that all of the korbanos, their shirayim, are going to be that all the korbanos on the Adam Mizbeach, their shirayim is poured on the Mizbeach. Maybe that's not what it's coming to teach. Maybe what it's coming to teach is that when you have a korban ola and you're doing the shtayim shein arba, it has to be on corners where there is the yesod beneath it, and not the southeastern corner where there is no yesod. Okay, that was the Gemara's question. It's again, oeno ela Mizbeach shel la Mizbeach shel Ola Yehei Yesod. Maybe what it means is that when it comes to the Korban Ola and you're doing the Zrikas Adam, the Shtayim Shein Arba of the Korban Ola, you're going to have to do it on corners where there is beneath them a Yesod, to the exclusion of the southeastern corner where there is no Yesod. So says the Gemara, no, that isn't what it means. Because Miksiv El Yesod HaOla, it does. If that's what it was teaching, it would say El Yesod HaOla, not Mizbach Ola. It would just be El Yesod, that where, in terms of the Yesod HaOla, that the Ola is where there is a Yesod. El Yesod Mizbach HaOla Ksiv but where am I? Miksiv el yisod ha'ola, el yisod mizbach ha'ola ksiv. Right? Instead, though, it says yisod mizbach ha'ola, and that is to teach that all of the korbanos on the outer mizbeach, their shirayim is poured on the yisod of the mizbeach. Fine. But says the Gemara, wait, 1 second. Maybe El Yesod Mizbach HaOla does in fact mean, like we suggested, that the Zrikas Adam of the Ola needs to be where there is Yesod underneath it, to the exclusion of the southeastern corner. Because Ihava Ksiv El Yesod HaOla, because if it would have simply just said El Yesod HaOla like you suggested, Hava Amina Bizkifa Di Yesod. Hasha Dichsiva Yesod Mizbach HaOla Agago Di Yesod. Okay, so if we go back to this diagram, so if we go back to this diagram, so where the white arrow is pointing, it's pointing to the sort of verticalness of the Yesod, going up, down, and where the blue arrow is pointing to is the top of the Yesod, that's kind of protruding and sticking out, going, I don't know, widthwise, left, right-wise, this, at the top of it, the roof of it, so to speak. So you got like the wall going up and down, and then you got like, so that's where the white arrow is pointing to, and the blue arrow is pointing down to the top of the layer of the Yesod. So the Gemara suggests that if it simply said El Yesod Ha'ola, I may have thought that it means that you're going to throw the blood against where the white arrow is pointing to, the vertical wall, so to speak, of the Yesod at the bottom of the Mizbeach. And now that it says Yesod Mizbach Ha'ola, the Mizbeach, what it's saying is that you're going to throw it against the wall of the Mizbeach such that the blood will drip down, will kind of leak down to the top of the Yesod where the blue arrow is pointing. Although, of course, it would be against the corner. I have my arrows kind of in the middle of the wall, but you would really do it at the corners of the wall, at the southeast corner there, southwest corner over there. Okay, now, where are we? So that was the Gemara suggested. So the Gemara suggested maybe it is talking about an Ola, and it is saying that the Ola needs to be the blood needs to be thrown against the Mizbeach in places where there is a Yesod. And it has to say Yesod Mizbach HaOla to teach that the blood goes on the top of the Yesod, not on the wall, not on the verticalness of the Yesod. So again, have a ksiv el Yesod HaOla have a mina bezkifa di Yesod. I may have thought that means the wall, the verticalness of the Yesod. Hasha dichsiv el Yesod Mizbach HaOla agago di Yesod. It means the top, the roof, so to speak, of the Yesod, the top layer where the blue arrow is pointing to. Rabbi Yishmael, says Rabbi Yishmael, meh. I don't need a special pasuk to teach me that it's the top of the Yesod as opposed to the wall of the Yesod. I don't want to keep on referencing back to the slide because then I have to keep on showing it, not showing it. It just kind of gets a little choppy. So if we remember just that I'm just going to talk about the, I guess, top of the Yesod and the wall of the Yesod, and that basically means the verticalness where the white arrow points and the top where the blue arrow points. So we're going to talk about the, I guess, wall of the Yesod and the top of the Yesod. Does that work? Or how about this? Maybe even the verticalness is, maybe it just be, it might actually, even though it's a made-up word, I guess, it might actually be helpful to imagine it. So the verticalness of the Yesod and the top of the Yesod. Okay. Now, Amr Bishmael, Gag Yesod Lam Likra, Kavachomer, says Rabbi Shmuel, I don't need a pasuk to teach me that the blood of the Ola goes on the top of the Yesod. I can learn that from using my noggin. Uma shiare chatas she'ena michaperes tuna gag Yesod. Well, when it comes to leftover blood of a korban chatas, after the blood of the korban chatas has been applied to the walls applied to the top of the mizbeach, so the rest of it is poured on the Yesod of the on the top of the Yesod of the mizbeach, and that is not coming to be mechaper, right? Again, mashiari achata she'ena mechaper, it's not coming to be mechaper because you already had the kapara from the matanos at the top of the mizbeach. This is the leftover blood, so the leftover blood is not mechaper. You already got your kapara. Tuna gag yesod, and that leftover blood is going to go at the top of the yesod. So tchilas ola shemichaperes, when we're talking about the shtaim shein arba of a korban ola, which is coming to be mechaper, I assume it's talking about being mechaper like korban ola for bitul mitzvahs essay. I assume it's referring to. So eino din shetuna gag yesod. Certainly, it would require the top of the yesod, not the verticalness of the yesod. Amar Rabbi Akiva says slightly differently. Umash shari chatas she'ein mechaperin ve'ein bain lechaper. When it comes to the shiari chatas, the leftover blood of the chatas that is not coming to be mechaper, and also that is not mechaper, and it's not coming to be mechaper either. Tuna gag yesod, it requires the top of the yesod. Tchilas ola, when it comes to the shtaim shin arba of a korban ola, she mechaperes, that is mechaper, right, by the korban ola, it is mechaper. Again, I assume for bitul mitzvahs essay, uva lechaper, and it comes to be mechaper. Enodin shetuna gag yesod, it certainly will require the top of the yesod, and we're going to learn shortly what the difference is between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yishmael, who says that the shiraim simply is not mechaper, and Rabbi Akiva, who says that the shiraim is not mechaper, nor is it coming to be mechaper. What is the difference between the two? We will get there soon. But anyways, the point is that we have that we can learn out from a kal v'chomer that the blood of the korban ola is going to be at the top of the yesod, not at the verticalness of the yesod. So imkein matam lomer el yesod mizbach haola. So okay, if we don't need el yesod mizbach haola to teach me the top of the yesod, like we had suggested earlier, well then why does it say el yesod mizbach haola? If it was just to teach me that the ola, the shtaim shein arba of the ola is where there's yesod, it could just say el yesod haola. What's yesod mizbach haola? Tain yesod lemizbeach shel ola. What it is coming to teach is that it's hard to exactly kind of fit it into the translation, but what it means is that all of the korbanos that are on the outside mizbeach, like osham, like chatas achitzo and shlovim, etc., their leftover blood is going to be poured on the yesod of the mizbeach hachitzon. Okay, so now getting back to that question of what is the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael had said, well, we have this kal v'chomer, if this shiari adam of chatas is not mechaper, and then you have Rabbi Akiva says it's not mechaper, nor is it coming to be mechaper. What's the difference? Omer of Ada bar Ahava says, Ada bar Ahava shirai ma'akvini kebenayu. If Ada bar Ahava wants to say that the difference is whether or not the shirayim of a korban chatas is me'akiv. What if you didn't pour the leftover blood of a korban chatas on the mizbeach? Is the korban still valid? My saver ma'akver, my saver ma'akver. Rabbi Yishmael holds that the leftover blood of the chatas is not mechaper, but you still need to do it, right? You already have the kapara from the matan damim on the top of the mizbeach. So the shirayim, according to Rabbi Yishmael, are not mechaper, but you still have to do it. According to Rabbi Akiva, they're not mechaper, nor are they bain lechaper. Even if you didn't do it, you would still be, right, it's not me'akev. Even if you didn't do it, the korban would still be valid. Rav Papa Amar says, Rav Papa, Techuli alma shirayim ein ma'akim. So Papa suggests that Rabbi Yishmael also agrees that the leftover blood of a korban chatos is not me'akev. If you didn't pour the leftover blood of a korban chatos on the yesod of the mizbeach, according to Rabbi Yishmael, the korban chatos would still be valid. What they are arguing about is if you were to have a chatas ha'of, a bird chatas offering. When do you bring a bird chatas offering? Maybe a yoledis brings a bird chatas offering? Anyways, so when you have a bird chatas, what about a bird chatas offering. Okay, you have a bird chatas offering. So the bird chatas offering, what you do is you do malika. Okay, you take the bird, the kohen sticks his fingernail into the back of the neck of the bird, and it dies, and there's blood, and you kind of flick around. I think you just kind of like flick around the bird to like get some of its blood on the mizbeach, and then the leftover blood, you like kind of squeeze the neck of the bird against the mizbeach to get out the rest of the blood from the bird. That's what we're talking about. The mitzvah, that's what's called that's what's called mitzvah, kind of pressing out the blood from the bird. So mitzvah chatas of me'akev kamiflige. They're arguing about the pressing out of the blood of the chatas ha'of against the wall of the mizbeach. Marsavar me'akev, marsavar me'akev. Reb Yishmael says that you gotta do it. Reb Akiva says you don't gotta do it. Tani kavasa to Papa. And we have a brisa supporting Rav Papa who says that everyone agrees that when it comes to the shiyare hadam, when it comes to the leftover blood of the korban chatas, not a chatas ha'of, but of the korban chatas, it is not ma'akev. If you did not pour it on the yisod of the mizbeach, the korban is still kosher, because the pasuk says ve'es kol dam apar yish poch. That I'm saying Rashi quick. Yeah, okay, fine. So the pasuk says "Ves kol dam apar yish poch." This is a pasuk by the Par Kohen Mashiach. It's interesting. The Gemara that I have, the Oz Vada Gemara here in Masechta Zevachim, so they have the psukim on the side, like they'll have the full pasuk, which is generally when I say like, oh, I'm going to read the whole pasuk, it's because I have the psukim here on the side of the Gemara. But here, it won't just tell you the pasuk; it'll also tell you the context in which the pasuk is. So here, it helps, right? So here it says that we're talking. This is a pasuk by the Par Kohen Mashiach. So it says by the Par Kohen Mashiach, ve'es kol dam apar yishpoch, that after you do the matan damim on the mizbeach pnimi and the paroches in the eichel, so then ve'es kol dam apar yishpoch, and all of the blood of the cow will then be poured on the yisod mizbach ha'olah. Now, matam alomer apar. Why does it davka say apar? It could just say ve'es kol adam yishpoch. What's ve'es kol dam hapar yishpoch? Matam alomer hapar. Why does it davka have to say hapar? Limed al par yom akipurim. It's talking about the par yom akipurim shetoun matan domim liyisod. Divrei Rebbe, says Rebbe that when it says hapar, it teaches that the par yom akipurim, the leftover blood, needs to be poured on the yesod of the mizbeach ha-chitzon, because it doesn't say by the par yom kippurim that you have to pour the leftover blood on the mizbeach ha-chitzon. So when it says by Par Kohen Mashiach ve'es kol dam hapar yishpoch, hapar is coming to teach that also by the par yom kippurim, the shiraim, the leftover blood, the shari adam, would be poured on the mizbeach ha-chitzon. Now, Omer Bishmal says Bishmal Kal v'chomer. However, I could have already learned this out on my own using my noggin. What's the Kal v'chomer? Uma im mi she'ein nichnas damo lifnim chova ta'un yisod. If it's written by the Par Kohen Mashiach. Now the Par Kohen Mashiach is a korban that it's not an obligation to bring. What does it mean it's not an obligation to bring? Well, hopefully you won't be bringing it, right? The Par Kohen Mashiach is only offered if the Kohen Gadol made a mistake on something that there's Ideally, hopefully, we shouldn't be bringing this korban at all. Hopefully, the Par Kohen Mashiach is the Kohen Gadol is not making such mistakes that would require him to bring this korban. So therefore, if when it comes to the Par Kohen Mashiach, which is a korban that there's no obligation to bring, sure, there's an obligation to bring it if you sin, but there's no obligation to sin so that you could bring it. So hopefully, as opposed to the Par Yom Kippur, of course, there's an obligation to bring it. Every Yom Kippur, you're going to bring this korban. So therefore, if we're talking about a Par Kohen Mashiach, where the blood that is applied in the heichal, there's no obligation for it. If you need to, you do it, but there's no obligation to sin, so you can bring this, do this matan dam ta'un yisod. And even when there's no obligation for the korban and for the matan damim bifnim, the leftovers need to be poured on the yesod of the mizbeach achitzon. So mi shenichnas damo lifnim chova, a par yom kippurim, where there is an obligation to bring it and to be applying the blood in the heichal. Einodin sheton yesod, certainly then it should require the shiari adam to also be poured on the yesod of the mizbeach achitzon. Rabbi Kiva also learns from a Kal V'chomer, but his kind of a slightly different Kal V'chomer, which is, Rabbi Kiva suggests, if when it comes to the Parkoin Mashiach, where the blood of the Parkoin Mashiach does not go into the Kodesh HaKodashim at all, Ta'un Yisod, and yet the leftovers are poured on the Yisod of the Mizbeach HaChitzon, Mishenichnas Damo Chova Lifnai V'Lifnim, the Par Yom HaKippurim, where there is an obligation for the blood to be applied in the Kodesh HaKodashim, or to be sprinkled in the Kodesh HaKodashim, Enudin Sheton Yisod, so then certainly it should require the Yisod. Okay, right, the leftovers will be poured in the Yisod. So, Rebbe had suggested that when it says Ves kol dam hapar yishboch, we say hapar is extra. Why is it there? So Rebbe said to teach that the shiari adam of the par Yom HaKippurim is poured on the yesod of the mizbeach achitzon. But then we had Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Kiva who says we can actually just learn that out with our noggins. If that's the case, so then why does it say par? So Yachol Yaakvenu. Well, then, if we don't necessarily need the pasuk to teach me par, because I could learn it out with my noggin using a Kal V'chomer, so then why does it say par? Is it possible that the pasuk is going out of its way to say par, to say that you have to do it, that it's me'akev? That if you don't pour the blood of the par Yom HaKippurim, then it is me'akev? Or any of the korbanos, meaning that you have to do it. So Talmud Omer, So Yaakvinus is talking in the context of the Par Yom HaKippurim. So Talmud Omer v'chila mikaper es hakodesh, that after the Kohen Gadol applies the blood in the Kodesh HaKodashim, in the Heichal, it says v'chila mikaper es hakodesh, and now the kapara of Yom HaKippurim is complete. Shalmu kol hakaparos kulan to Rabbi Yishmael. Says Rabbi Yishmael that at that point, all, meaning once the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur has completed all of the different applications, we've said earlier that there's 43, or maybe according to some 47 or even 48 applications of blood. Once those are done, the kapara of Yom Kippurim is complete, even though the blood has not yet been poured on the yesod of the Mizbeach Achitzon. So, and that's even according to Rabbi Yishmael. It says Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, right? So we see that everyone agrees that the pouring of the blood is not on the yesod of the Mizbeach Achitzon is not me'akev. And when Rabbi Yishmael is saying something is me'akev, what do you have to do? It is the pressing of the blood of the chatas ha'of on the Mizbeach. Rabbi Yishmael says you have to do that. But pouring of the blood of the chatas on the yesod of the Mizbeach is not me'akev. Says the Gemara, Kal V'chomer lepar kohen Mashiach. Says Rabbi Shmuel, now I can have a So now says the Gemara, Kal V'chomer lepar kohen Mashiach. I can have a Kal V'chomer for the par kohen Mashiach. What would that Kal V'chomer be? Me'ata. Uma mi she'ein nichnas damo lifnim lo chova v'lo mitzvah. When it comes to the Sa'ir Nasi, the Sa'ir Nasi, of course, is just a regular korban chatas, just that the one bringing it is the king, like we learned about Masechta Horius. The king brings, instead of a kispa v'seira, he brings a sa'ir. That's the korban nasi. Now the sa'ir nasi. Now the sa'ir nasi is just a regular korban chatas. Its blood is not going in to the heichel. The blood of the sa'ir nasi is only on the mizbeach achitzon. So matter umma Misha ein nichnas damo lifnim lo chova v'lo mitzvah. If when it comes to the sa'ir nasi, where the blood of the sa'ir nasi does not go into the eichel at all, ta'un yesod, and yet the leftovers are poured on the yesod of the mizbeach hachitzon. Mi shenichnas damo lifnim. So it's weird. So Rashi says you can drop bein the chova, bein the mitzvah. You could say mi shenichnas damo lifnim the mitzvah when it comes to the par kohen mashiach, because there's no, as we said earlier, there's no obligation to bring a par kohen mashiach. But if you do bring the par kohen mashiach, the blood would be applied in the heichol. So eno din sheton yesod. Certainly, then the leftovers should have to be on the yesod of mizbeach hachitzon, right? If the sa'ir nasi, which the blood does not go at all in the heichol, and yet the leftovers are poured on the mizbeach hachitzon, so then certainly the par kohen mashiach, whose blood is sprinkled in the heichol, certainly then the leftovers should be poured on the yesod of mizbeach hachitzon. So then why does the pasuk say, if we can learn it out through our noggins with the kal v'chomer, so why do I need the pasuk to say that the leftover blood by the par kohen mashiach are poured in the yesod of mizbeach hachitzon? So Yochel Yakvenu, is it possible to say that you have to do it, and if you don't pour the blood in the mizbeach hachitzon, the leftovers for par kohen mashiach, it's possible? So Talmud Lomar ve'eskol dam apar yishpoch, that it says ve'eskol dam apar yishpoch. So as Rashi points out, that when it says, so it says by the other commandments by a par kohen mashiach, it says things like v'lokach, v'hiza, v'nosan. But over here it doesn't say v'shafach. It says ve'es kol dam apar yishpoch. It doesn't say v'shafach, it says yishpoch. Nisko hakosov, skip the next word, ve'aso shiare mitzvah. The pasuk, when it comes to pouring of the leftover blood of the par kohen mashiach, specifically uses a different verb in order to make it different than the obligation parts of it, to say that, to make it baso shiari mitzvah, i.e., it's something that even if you didn't do it, the korban would still be valuable. Lomar l'cha shiraim ein me'akvin, to say to you that pouring of the shiraim of the par kohen mashiach is not me'akev. V'sav Rabbi Shmuel mitzvah chatas of me'akev. But now the Gemara asks, so we had said that what's the difference between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva? We said the difference is the pressing of the neck of the chatas ha'of against the mizbeach. Rabbi Shmuel says you gotta do it. Rabbi Akiva says you don't gotta do it. Now, for the Gemara, is that really true? V'savar Rabbi Shmuel mitzvah chatas of me'akev. Is that really so that Rabbi Shmuel says you gotta do it? You gotta press the neck of the chatas ha'of against the wall of the mizbeach. Vatani, we learned about the Rabbi Shmuel. Ve'anishur badom yimotze. The leftover blood will be pressed against the mizbeach. Ve'anishur yimatze. V'she'enu nishur lo yimatze. If there's leftover blood in the bird, in the chatas ha'of, okay, so press it against the mizbeach. If there is no leftover blood, well then don't press it against the mizbeach, and that's fine. So Trei Tanoi V'Libu Rabbi Shmuel answers the Gemara, well, there are two Tanoim who were saying that this is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, and they had differing views on what Rabbi Shmuel's opinion in fact was. One Tana said that Rabbi Shmuel says, you gotta press the neck of the chatas ha'of against the wall of the mizbeach. The other Tana says, you don't gotta do it. Alright, and now we get up to the next section of today's daf, applying chatas blood below the chut hasikra. Of course, the chut hasikra is this red line that divides the height of the mizbeach in half. Now, most korbanos, their blood is below the chut hasikra, like a shlamim or a toda or whatever. The exceptions being the korban chatas. The korban chatas, the blood of a korban chatas is above the chut hasikra. We're going to see a machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. I think that's tomorrow, about if it dafka has to be like on those cubes on the corners, but it has to be above the chut hasikra. Also, the olas ha'of, the blood is above the chut hasikra. All other korbanos, including chatas ha'of, all other korbanos are below the chut hasikra. Now, says the Gemara, Omer Rami Bar Choma Aitana Sover Shirayim Ma'akve. Okay, so it says Rami Bar Choma that the following Tana, or so he wants to suggest, so Rami Bar Choma that the following Tana holds that the Shirayim, pouring the leftover blood on the Mizbeach Achitzon, is Ma'akev. You gotta do it. Okay, let's see. The Tana we learn in the Brisa. Hakoyin amachate osa. Okay, so the pasuk says, I'll read you the pasuk. Daber l'Aaron v'abanav lemer is Toras chatas. This is the chatas. Bimkom asher tishachit ha'ola tishachit chatas. Lifnei Hashem kodesh kedoshim he. Hakoyin amachate osa yochalena. The kohen who's sprinkling the blood, he can eat it. B'makom kodesh. Someone say hakoyin amachate osa yochalena, and that is what we are focusing on. Osa, it. Now back in the Gemara. Hakoyin amachate osa shenitan dama lemaila velo osa shenitan dama lemata. Okay, so says the Gemara, when it says osa, it's being specific, and it's saying that the kohen can only eat the korban if the blood of the korban chatas was applied above the chut hasikra, where it's supposed to be applied. However, if the blood of a korban chatas was applied below the chut hasikra, so then it's a problem. So then it's a problem. What does Rashi say? Okay, fine. Okay, fine. Okay, right. Then you can eat it and it's proper, fine. But otherwise, not. If it's below the chut hasikra, you can't eat it. Now, so we have this pasuk saying that the blood needs to be above the chut hasikra, not below. Now, Amad v'chi me'ayin basa. Now, why would you have thought otherwise? Why does the pasuk need to specifically say you have to do the application of the blood of the korban chatas needs to be above the sikra, chut hasikra? And if it's below, no good. Why would I have thought otherwise? I mean, why would I have thought that maybe if it was below the chut hasikra, it should be kosher, that the pasuk comes to say, no, it's not kosher, it's pasul. Why would I have thought that it's kosher? Why would I have thought that it would be kosher in the first place, that the pasuk needs to say that it's pasul if the blood is below the chut hasikra? Michlal shenemar, because the pasuk says, V'dam zvachecha yishpoch al mizbach v'gomer, or I'm sorry. We had learned this on Daf Mem? No. Really? Was this on Daf? No, I feel like this was somewhere else. Wait, where's Beis? Lamed Vav Mid Beis. Okay. So we had learned on Daf Lamed Vav Mid Beis from, right, this was at the beginning of one of the Prakim, right? Was it beginning of the third? Yeah, the beginning of Perik Beis Shammai. That we had learned that by other korbanis, including even the chatas achitzon, if you only did one of the four, right? If you only did one mata, right? Whether it's zrika, only one of the zrikas adams, or the matan dam by the korban chatas, or smachlokas b'sham and b'sil. So that's v'dam zvachecha yishavach hamizbach lamanu le'nitonim b'matan arba shem nisonim b'matan achas kiper. So we see that when it comes to korbanos, so even let's say a korban ola, let's say, where you have to do shtayim shein arba, but if you only did one application of blood, it's still beseder. So even though it says you have to do 4, even if you only did 1, it would still be beseder. So therefore, I may have thought, so yochel afan itarnin lamaila shenison lamata kiper. So maybe I may have thought that just like when you have to do the blood, 4 applications of blood, but you do 1, it's sufficient. So maybe when you have to do the blood above the chut hasikra, if you did it below the chut hasikra, it's also sufficient. So therefore, the pasuk had to come and teach me, osa, to say no. The blood of a korban chatas must be above the chut hasikra. It can't be below the chut hasikra. But the Gemara says, 1 second. But still, I could have just used my noggin in order to know that the blood needs to be above the chut hasikra. How come? How do I use my noggin to learn that? Well, v'dinu, it's kav v'chomer. Nemru damim lemala, v'nemru damim lematon, madam amurim lematon, shenisanon lemailon lo kiper. Well, because there are certain korbanos that their blood is above the chut hasikra. In other korbanos, the blood is below the chut hasikra. Now, again, when it comes to blood, let's say of a shlom, let's say the blood is below. You do zrikas adam below the chut hasikra. Shenisan and lamala, if you apply them above the chut hasikra, lo kiper. It doesn't work. It's no good. The blood has to be below the chut hasikra. So after mamurim the mylon, himson the matan, lo kiper. So let's say the same thing in reverse. A korban chatas, where the blood needs to be above the chut hasikra, if you apply the blood below the chut hasikra, it doesn't work. Right, just like the ones that have to be below, if you did it above, it doesn't work. The ones that you have to do above, if you do below, it doesn't work. So again, why do I need the pasuk? I could just use my nagin. So the Gemara says, well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. So I'm actually going to make some pretty big changes to the text based on the Shita Mekubetzes. So I'm actually not even going to be reading from the Gemara right now. I'm going to be reading from a note that I have in my Gemara. If you have the Oz V'Hadar Gemara or some other Gemara that has access to the Shita Mekubetzes and the different Girsa, I'm going to be reading it like that. I'll let you know when I'm back in the text of the Gemara. So now, the Gemara says, no, we can't just say that. We can't just say, well, Korban Shlamim, if you do Zrikas Adam above the Chut HaSikra, it's no good. So therefore the Korban Chatas, if you do the Matzah Dam below the Chut HaSikra, it's no good. No, not necessarily. Because I can make an argument that it's logical to say that let's say Korban Shlamim above the Chut HaSikra doesn't work, but I can argue that a Chatas below the Chut HaSikra should work. Shlom Omar, now here I'm jumping out to the Shita Mekubetzes. B'nitanin limata, I can understand why let's say a Korban Shlamim, where the blood needs to be thrown below the Chut HaSikra, that if you throw it above the Chut HaSikra, it's possible because Shekain Ein Sofan Limaila, because they aren't destined at all to be above the Chut HaSikra. There's no, a Korban Shlamim, the Zrikas Adam is always going to be below the Chut HaSikra. It's never going to be above the Chut HaSikra. Tomar B'nitanin Limaila, as opposed to a Korban Chatas, Shekain Sofan Limata, that a Korban Chatas, the blood is applied to the top of the Mizbech, but the Shirayim is then going to be spilled, going to be poured on the Yesod of the Mizbech, which is below the Chut HaSikra. So therefore, I can understand why a Korban Shlamim, for example, if the blood of a Korban Shlamim is thrown above the Chut HaSikra, it's invalid, because the Korban Shlamim has no business ever being above the Chut HaSikra, which is not the case by a Korban Chatas. The Korban Chatas, the blood is initially applied above the Chut HaSikra, but the rest of the blood, the Shirayim, is going to be poured at the Yesod of the Mizbech, below the Chut HaSikra. So I can argue that, well, ultimately, the blood of a Korban Chatas is going to be poured below the Chut HaSikra. So therefore, maybe even if initially the blood was applied below the Chut HaSikra, it could work. So I can't just learn it out with my noggin. But then we says, I'm still in the note, Domim apnimim yochichu. Okay, but maybe I can learn for the Korban Chatas that you can't apply below the Chut HaSikra from Domim apnimim, right? Chatos apnimios. Why? What about them? Shesofan lachutz, because if you take like a Parkoi Mashiach, for example, so the blood is applied in the heichal, on the paroches, on the Mizbach Hazov, and then afterwards you are going to apply the blood, you're going to spill the leftovers bachutz. You're going to spill the leftovers on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. So now I'm back in the Gemara on the second line of the wide lines in the Gemara in the middle of the line. And if you initially do the Zrikas Adam of a Chatas Apnimi on the outer Mizbeach, it doesn't work. So meaning, if you take a Parkoi Mashiach, for example, the Parkoi Mashiach, the blood, the Zrikas Adam is in the Heichel. You're then going to go out to the Mizbeach HaChitzon to pour out the Shiari Adam. So ultimately, the blood of the Par Kohen Mashiach is going to end up on the Yisod of Mizbeach HaChitzon, just like by a regular Korban Chatas, the Shiraim are ultimately going to be poured on the Yisod of Mizbeach HaChitzon. And yet, when it comes to Chatas HaPnimi, if you were to do the Zrikas Adam on the Mizbeach HaChitzon and not in the Heichal, puzzle. Even though, yes, ultimately the blood is going to end up being poured on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, but that's the leftover blood. The actual Zrikas Adam is going to have to be inside of the Heichal. It can't be on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, and therefore I'll say the same thing by a Korban Chatas. Even though, yes, a Korban Chatas, ultimately the Shiari Adam is going to be poured on the Yisod of the Mizbeach. But that's the Shiari Adam. The actual application of the blood initially is going to have to be on the top of the Mizbeach. To which the Gemara says, it's not necessarily a good comparison because she'ein mizbeach apnimi mimarkon. We're going to have to understand exactly what that means. But well, here's the thing. That when you do, the mizbeach apnimi by a Par Kohen Mashiach is not sort of the only avoda that needs to be done. There's more avodas. Tomer be'elyonim sharei kranos mimarkos osan, which is different when it comes to a regular korban chatas, where the application of the blood is actually all that needs to be done. What's the base? And it says, Tomar ben Yitzan, where am I? So, Hoil v'kronis mimarkus osan, and therefore I'll say that since by a regular korban chatas, since the application of the blood above the chut hasikra, right, the application of the blood is the only matan dam that needs to be done, im nisanan limata ksherim. If you did it below, we'll say that it would be kosher. So, Talmud lomar osa. Okay, so therefore, because I can't learn it out from the chatos apnimios, so therefore I need the pasuk to say that the blood of the chatas needs to be above the chut hasikra. It can't be below the chut hasikra. Okay. And what did it mean that the blood of the chatos apnimios on the mizbeach apnimi is not the only avoda that needs to be done? Lav ela shirayim. So Rami Bar Chama wants to suggest, what does it mean that by a chatos apnimi, the blood on the mizbeach apnimi is not all that needs to be done? Is not to say that what else needs to be done? The rest of the blood needs to be poured on the yesod of the Mizbeach HaChitzon, and that must be done. So Rami Bar Chama wants to suggest that we see from here that the shirayim of a chatos apnimi does in fact need to be poured on the yesod of the Mizbeach. Amalei Rava, to which Rava says to him, Iachi tesi bikalva chomer. Well, if that's the case, then I will say the following kalva chomer. Mashirayim hapnimim, if when it comes to the leftovers of a chatos apnimi, the leftover blood, shesofon chova bachutz, that there's an obligation to pour the leftover blood on the mizbeach hachitzon, ason batchila bachutz lo kiper, and yet even though there is an obligation for the shirayim to be poured on the mizbeach hachitzon, nonetheless, if the blood of the chatas apnimi that's supposed to be inside the heichal was done on the mizbeach hachitzon, where ultimately there's an obligation for the blood to end up still lo kiper, it's no good. Sanitanin lemaila she'ein sofan chova lamata. Well, then I would say certainly then by a korban chatos where the blood is above the chut hasikra, and there's no obligation for the leftovers to be poured on the yesod of the mizbeach. Certainly, then, if you did the matan damim below the chut hasikra, it would not work, right? Meaning, I would be able to make the following kavachomer. If we're going right, if what Rava responds to Rabbi Bar Chama, he says, look, if you're correct that there is an obligation to pour the shiari adam of a chatas apnimi on the mizbeach achitzon, there's an obligation, which means that there's an obligation for the blood of a chatas apnimi to end up on the mizbeach achitzon, and yet, if by a chatas apnimi the blood was milchatchila done on the mizbeach achitzon and not in the mizbeach apnimi, it's no good. You have to do it in the mizbeach apnimi, even though the blood ultimately there's an obligation to end up on the chatas on the mizbeach achitzon. Doesn't matter. You have to do the actual matan damim on the mizbeach apnimi. Well, then certainly then by a regular korban chatas achitzon, where there is no obligation to pour the shiraim on the yesod mizbeach, it's not an obligation for the blood to end up on below the chut hasikra. Certainly, then I would assume that you would have to make sure that the blood is above the chut hasikra, and therefore I don't need the pasuk of osa. So rather, ela ein mizbeach apnimi mimarkon bilvad ela paroches. Rather, says Rava, what it means is that by the chatas apnimi, the mizbeach apnimi is not the only matan dam that needs to be done, not because you have to pour the rest of it on the yesod of mizbeach chitzon, but because you also have to sprinkle some of the blood by the paroches in the heichal as well. That is the other part that still needs to be done. But there is no obligation, however, says Rava, to pour the leftover blood of chatas apnimi on the mizbeach chitzon. Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught. V'chila mikaper. We've seen this before. Where did we see this before? And Daf Mem. This is what we saw in Daf Mem. V'chila mikaper im kiper kila v'im lo kiper lo kila divrei Rabbi Kiva. Says Rabbi Kiva that when the pasuk says by the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, the high priest on Yom Kippur, v'chila mikaper, and he has completed from atoning im kiper kila. So Rabbi Akiva then reverses it when he darshans it. He says, Im kiper, if he did the kapara, the question is what exactly does this mean? But if he did the kapara, if he did the zrikas adam, right, he applied all the blood, kila, so now he's done with all of the atonement stuff. Im lo kiper, if he didn't do all the kabbalas, all the zrikas adams, so then lo kila is not yet done. The Rabbi Kiva, Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Mipnei ma lo nomar, why don't we just expound it as it's written? Im kila kiper, that if he completed doing all of the matan damim, kiper, then there is kapar. V'im lo kila, if he didn't complete doing all of the matan damim, lo kiper, there's no kapar. Shem chizer achas mikol matanos, if he left out any of the matanos adam, lo asav lo klum, he has accomplished nothing. In order to have kapara, all of the matan damim must be complete. My benayu, what's the difference between Reb Akiva and Reb Yehuda? So there's a machlekes, Reb Yochanan and Reb Yoshua ben Levi, about what the difference is between Reb Akiva and Reb Yehuda. Reb Yochanan and Reb Yoshua ben Levi, Chadomer, one opinion is Mashmo's Dorshin Ika Benayu, that the difference between them is simply how to understand the pasuk. That's it. They both say that you have to do the matan damim, sprinkling the blood, right, on the parochas and mizbeach hapnimi. And it's just a difference between how exactly to learn out the different things, right? Rabbi Akiva learns out from Im Kiper Kila, that as long as he's done all the matan damim, so now he's done. Rabbi Yehuda says, look, Im Kiper Kila, maybe I could think, Rabbi Yehuda says, look, if it's just from Im Kiper Kila, maybe I could think that even if you just did part of the matan damim, not all of them, you still would be considered done. So rather he says, no, Mkila, if you did all of the matan damim, only then you have kapara. Okay, but it's a machlokas about exactly how to understand keeper versus kila. Okay, but essentially they're both referring to the matan damim. The other opinion is that there's actually a difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda in terms of, do you have to pour the leftover blood on Yom Kippur on the Mizbeach HaChitzon? Rabbi Akiva says Im Kiper Kila, that the only, right, as long as he's done the matan damim then he's done. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, Im kila kiper, only if he's completed doing everything, including the pouring the shari adam on the mizbeach achitzon, only then is it keeper, only then is there kapar. So there's two different ways, right? According to the first way, both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda are talking about the matan damim. The machlokas is, do you learn it out from keeper versus kila? Whereas the other opinion is that there's actually a difference in terms of, do you have to do if you don't pour the leftovers on the mizbech chitzon, do you still get kapara or not? Now, this time Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi Uda Amar Shiraim D'Ma'akve, right? Shiraim Ma'akve Nikabenai, right? So let's say that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is the one whose opinion is that the nafkamina between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda is whether or not you have to pour the shiraim on the mizbech chitzon. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, because Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says L'divrei Omer Shiraim Me'akvin maybe Paracher Matzcha Batchila Bifnim. Okay. Because Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, with regard to if one had done all of the applications of the blood on Yom Kippur, but then the blood fell on the floor before he had the opportunity to pour the leftovers on the mizbech chitzon. So again, so it says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Ha'omer shirayim ma'akvin, that if you hold that shirayim are ma'akiv, that you have to pour the blood on the mizbech chitzon, well then maybe par acher you're gonna have to bring a new cow and bifnim and start over in the heichel. So we see that according that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi recognizes at least that there is an opinion that you have to do the shiraim, you have to pour the shiraim on the mizbeach achitzon. Therefore, let's say that it's Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi who recognizes that there's an opinion about that you have to pour the shiraim in the mizbeach achitzon. Therefore, he's the one who says that the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda is dafka on that point. However, at Rabbi Yochanan leislei osvar, but does Rabbi Yochanan not hold that there is an opinion who says that you have to pour the shiraim in the mizbeach chitzon? After all, Rabbi Yochanan says Tana Reb Nechemya ki divrei omer shiraim ma'akvin, that Rabbi Yochanan, in explaining the opinion of Reb Nechemya, says that Reb Nechemya holds like the opinion that shiraim are ma'akvin, meaning just like Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi had said the divrei omer shiraim ma'akvin, etc. Rabbi Yochanan also says Tana Rabbi Nechemya ki divrei omer shiraim ma'akvin. Both Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi are talking about and recognizing that there is an opinion who holds that shiraim are ma'akev, and therefore Ella ki divrei omer v'lav la'anin tanoi. So rather, if you're going to say that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says that the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda is whether or not you hold that you have to pour the shiraim on the mizbech chitzon, well then, right, if we're saying that's Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's opinion, well then Rabbi Yochanan, when he says Kedivriya Omer, he would have to say that the Kedivriya Omer is not like, meaning if it's Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi was saying that the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Yehuda is about shiraim, well then it must be then that Rabbi Yochanan, when he's talking about Kedivrei HaOmer, he's saying, he's recognizing, okay, that is someone who holds this way, but that's a different machlokas than the machlokas of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda, because we're saying that that's like, because it's Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi who's saying that the difference is shiraim in that case. Sheesh, this is really technical. And you could say the same thing, right? If you want to say that, you could also say that it's Rabbi Yochanan who says that in the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva, the difference is about shiraim. In which case, when Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is talking about the one who says shiraim, well, he's not talking about that in this particular machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva, because we're saying that his opinion here is that the difference is about mashmos darshan. Anyways, it's unclear who says what here, right? There's machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda about kila keeper kila. One opinion is that the difference is about, do you have to pour the shiraim in the mizbech chitzon? The other opinion is that it's just a matter of mashmos darshan. One opinion is Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. The other opinion is Rabbi Yochanan. We don't actually know whose is whose. Friends, that was Daf Nun Beis of Masechta Zevachim. On Daf Nun Beis of Masechta Zevachim, we learned about pouring leftover blood on the outer altar, on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. We saw the opinion of Rav Ada Bar Ahava, who wanted to say that according to Rabbi Yishmael, you gotta do it, and according to Rabbi Kiva, you don't have to do it. But then we also saw the opinion of Rav Papa, who says that everyone agrees that you don't have to do it when it comes to the leftover blood. The difference between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Kiva is with regard to pressing the neck of a chatas ha'of against the mizbeach. And then we discussed applying the chatas blood below the hasikra. That is asur. You have to apply the chatas blood above the hasikra in order for the chatas to be kosher, and in order to be able to then eat the korban chatas. Friends, that was Daf Nun Beis of Masechta Zevachim. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.